On Christmas Eve 1945, in Fayetteville, West Virginia, a devastating fire destroyed the home of the Soder family. While the parents, George and Jenny, along with 4 of their 10 children, managed to escape, 5 of the children were tragically never seen again. What followed was not a story of closure, but one of the most baffling and enduring mysteries in American history. Did the children perish in the blaze, or did something far more sinister happen that night? Let's set the scene. The Soder family was a respected and prosperous Italian-American family. George Soder was an immigrant who had built a successful trucking business. He was known for being outspoken, particularly with his strong opinions against Benito Mussolini, which was not always popular in the local Italian community. The family was large, lively, and by all accounts, happy. On that fateful Christmas Eve, the older children, who were allowed to stay up late, were playing with new toys. Jenny Soder went to bed around 10 p.m., reminding them to shut off the lights and lock the doors when they were done. George and 2 of their older sons, who had spent the day working, were already asleep. Around midnight, the phone rang. Jenny answered. A woman on the other end asked for a name she didn't recognize. Jenny told her she had the wrong number and heard strange laughter in the background before the woman hung up. Thinking it was just a prank call, Jenny went back to bed. But on her way, she noticed that the lights were still on and the front door was unlocked. She assumed the kids had forgotten in their excitement and took care of it before going back to sleep. Just an hour later, around 1 a.m., she was awakened again, this time by a loud thud on the roof, followed by a rolling sound. She fell back asleep, only to be woken a half hour later by the smell of smoke. The house was on fire. The scene was pure chaos. George, Jenny, and 4 of their children, Mary and John, George Jr., and Sylvia, scrambled out of the house. But Morris, Martha, Louie, Jenny, and Betty, whose bedrooms were in the attic, were still trapped inside. Panic set in. George frantically tried to get back into the house to save them. He broke a window, cutting his arm in the process, but the smoke and flames were too intense. He then raced to find his ladder, which was always kept in the same spot against the side of the house. But it was gone. It wasn't just misplaced. It had vanished. His next idea was to pull one of his work trucks up to the house and climb on top of it to reach the attic window. But inexplicably, neither of his trucks would start. They had been working perfectly just the day before. The family's water barrel was frozen solid, rendering it useless against the inferno. Desperate and helpless, the Soders could only watch as their home burned to the ground, collapsing into the basement in just 45 minutes. The fire department's response was another strange piece of the puzzle. Despite the fire station being only 2.5 miles away, firefighters didn't arrive until 8 a.m. the next morning, a full 7 hours after the fire started. The fire chief at the time, F.J. Morris, claimed the delay was due to a combination of factors. He couldn't drive the fire truck because he didn't know how, and the phone tree system for assembling the volunteer crew had failed. By the time they arrived, the Soder home was nothing but a smoldering pile of ashes. A brief, 2-hour investigation was conducted, and the official conclusion was that the 5 missing children had died in the fire. Their cause of death was listed as fire or suffocation, and death certificates were issued just a few days later. The official cause of the fire was deemed to be faulty wiring, but George and Jenny Soder could not accept this conclusion. Their search for answers, which would consume the rest of their lives, was just beginning. Several things didn't add up for the grieving parents. First, if the fire was caused by faulty wiring, how had the Christmas lights stayed on during the initial part of the blaze? Jenny remembered them being on as they escaped. Also, if their children had been incinerated, why were no remains found? The fire chief claimed the fire was hot enough to completely cremate the bodies, but Jenny, who had worked in a crematorium, knew this was unlikely. A house fire, even an intense one, rarely reaches the temperatures required for complete cremation, which takes hours in a specialized oven. Furthermore, no bones or even bone fragments were ever sifted from the ashes. Household appliances, which would have melted at a much lower temperature, were found warped but recognizable in the debris. How could steel appliances survive, but human bones vanish without a trace? The Sodders began to suspect the fire was intentionally set and that their children had been kidnapped. Their suspicions were fueled by a series of strange events leading up to and following the fire. Months before the fire, a stranger had come to their house looking for work and pointed out that their fuse boxes were a fire hazard. George, who had just had the house rewired, thought this was odd. Around the same time, another man, a life insurance salesman, tried to sell George a policy on his children. When George refused, the man became angry and warned him, "Your goddamn house is going up in smoke, and your children are going to be destroyed. You are going to be paid for the dirty remarks you have been making about Mussolini." George dismissed it as a threat from a disgruntled salesman, but in hindsight, it felt chillingly prescient. Just a few weeks before Christmas, some of the older Sodder boys noticed a strange car parked along the highway, its occupants watching the younger children as they walked home from school. After the fire, the strange occurrences continued. A telephone repairman told the Sodders that their phone line appeared to have been cut, not burned. This could explain the strange midnight phone call. Perhaps it was a lure to make Jenny come downstairs, ensuring the door was unlocked for an intruder. The missing ladder was later found thrown into an embankment about 75 feet from the house. Why would someone move it unless they wanted to prevent a rescue? Then came the sightings. A woman who ran a tourist stop between Fayetteville and Charleston claimed she saw the children in a car that sped past on the morning of the fire. She said she also saw them a week later at a Charleston hotel with 2 men and 2 women who appeared to be of Italian extraction. The group was hostile and refused to let her speak to the children. A bus driver on a late-night route saw people throwing fireballs, what sounded like pineapple bombs or small explosives, at the Sodder house right before it went up in flames. This could explain the loud thud Jenny heard on the roof. The Sodders were so convinced their children were alive that they hired a private investigator named C.C. Tinsley. Tinsley uncovered a disturbing story about the fire chief, F.J. Morris. He learned that Morris had allegedly found a human heart in the ashes, which he secretly buried in a box. Years later, under pressure from George Sodder, Morris led him to the spot. George had the box exhumed and took the heart to a local funeral director who determined it was actually fresh beef liver and it had never been exposed to fire. It seemed like a deliberate attempt to placate the family and close the case. The Sodders never gave up hope. In 1952, they erected a large billboard along Route 16 with photos of the 5 children and a reward for any information leading to their recovery. They traveled across the country, following up on every lead, no matter how small. They sent letters to the FBI, but J. Edgar Hoover declined to get involved, stating it was a local matter unless evidence of kidnapping across state lines could be proven. Perhaps the most haunting clue came 20 years after the fire. In 1968, Jenny Sodder received a letter postmarked from Kentucky with no return address. Inside was a photograph of a young man in his mid-20s. On the back of the photo was a cryptic handwritten note. Louis Sodder, I love brother Frankie. Illo boys. A 90132 or 35. The family was struck by the resemblance to their son Louis, who would have been in his late 20s. The dark, curly hair, the dark eyes, the shape of the nose, it was all eerily similar. They hired another private detective to investigate the letter, but he took their money and disappeared. The billboard remained up for the rest of their lives, a constant, heartbreaking reminder of their lost children. George Sodder passed away in 1969, and Jenny followed in 1989. The remaining Sodder children and their descendants have continued the search, but the mystery remains unsolved. So what happened to the Sodder children? One theory holds that they were kidnapped by the Sicilian mafia, perhaps as retaliation for George's anti-Mussolini sentiments. This could explain the efficiency of the crime, the strange sightings of the children with Italian-looking adults, and the general fear and silence from the local community. Another theory suggests the children were taken by someone involved in an illegal adoption ring. Or perhaps, as tragic as it is to consider, they did perish in the fire, and the lack of remains and strange circumstances were just a series of unfortunate coincidences and procedural errors. But for the Sodder family, the hope that Morris, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and Betty started a new life somewhere under new names never died. The story is a powerful testament to a parent's love and the agonizing pain of not knowing. The fire on Christmas Eve 1945 may have destroyed the Sodder home, but it ignited a mystery that continues to burn almost 80 years later. What do you think happened? Let me know your theories in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more unsolved mysteries.